live human dignity. Philippines will continue.
Kawalan ng anak ko sa akin. Tapos sasabihin lang ng kapulisan, collateral damage. Masakit po talaga.
Hinahangad talaga namin na magkaroon ng investigasyon at panagutin.
Sabihin ko dyan sa mga lumad ngayon, umalis kayo dyan. Bubombahan ko yan.
Habang po kami ay nasa klase, pinagbabaril po yung school namin. Bata pa po ako. Ba't magarata ko ng ganito?
Hindi namin alam kung sino kakasuhan namin.
I will not hesitate my soldiers to shoot you. I will not hesitate to order the police to arrest and detain you. Ako, magpakamatay ako sa prinsipyo ko. Kung ikamatay ko, okay yan sa akin. Ipakulong ako habang may okay sa akin yan. Pero ginawa ko ang yan ko na tama.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody who's joined us for this global launch of the initial report of Investigateph. Investigateph is the independent international commission of investigation into human rights violations in the Philippines. My name is Peter Murphy. I am the chair of the core working group of this project and come from the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. And I'm based in Sydney, Australia. So we have a large number of participants tonight, and I especially want to welcome the media workers who've come online to speak directly to the commissioners who are launching this report. We had a brief discussion earlier today with some of the people in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, so that we could convey our encouragement to their agency and to the entire international community, especially to governments, to let them know that we want to see action on the upholding of the basic human rights of people in the Philippines, just as everywhere else in the world, and to convey that we have a great sense of a crisis there. So in the program, we will have a video message from a family involved who are victims really of what happened on Bloody Sunday, March 7, so just a little while ago now. And then we will hear from the commissioners who are present here tonight. So let's have the video, please.
Paano po makakalaban? Ang timano po yung nakapusas na. Tapos tinanggalan nila ng pusas, pinalabas nila yung nangangapa ng aking anak. Napilay na, sino man po ang makakalaban doon?
Their families have barely begun the process of grieving, but they had to cremate the remains of 25-year-old Ariel Evangelista and his wife, Chai, aged 30, due to the nature of the injuries they sustained. Ariel died of gunshot wounds which punctured his heart and lungs, while a gunshot pierced through Chai's heart, lungs, liver, and intestines. Both were killed in a dawn raid in Nasugbu, Batangas Sunday among the 9 activists who allegedly resisted arrest and got killed in what is now known as Bloody Sunday. But their families contest the police's version of the events, pointing out that aside from gunshot wounds, the two also allegedly sustained abrasions and broken bones. The arrest of the couple was seen by Ariel's child, who was sleeping in the same room.
Naiyak po siya. Sabi nanay Inda, ang nanay ko at saka ang tatay ko kinuha ng sundalo. Sabi nga, saan ka? Andito ako, nagtatago ako sa ilalim ng papag.
They were declared dead on arrival at the hospital, and their relatives, who initially had no clue where they were, later found them at a funeral home. Ariel and Chai were both members of Umalpaska, a local chapter for fisherfolk group Pamalakaya. They once opposed the putting up of fish cages just off the shore, which would have affected their and their neighbors' livelihood. Pumalacaya believes their advocacy against coastal and land conversion had something to do with their deaths, based on the initial results of their fact-finding mission Wednesday with Rights Group Alliance Karapatan. Their families also say they were active in helping secure relief packages for their neighbors, as they deny police's claims the couple were communist rebels.
Hindi po naman kami mga ganong tao, pero bakit po ganon kami sabas ng mga militar? Hindi po naman yan makatao. Wala na po yatang rights ang mga kaparis namin.
Yes. So this is the situation we are trying to address. Could I now just invite for 1 to 2 minute contributions from the commissioners, starting with Dr. Agnes Abuam from the Faith Community and the World Council of Churches. Dr. Agnes.
Respect for human rights and human dignity has been a major concern for us as people of faith, and this investigation report allows us to have evidence that can show the inability or the unwillingness of the various state mechanisms to actually abide by the global international rules and procedures. Definitely, the Anti-Terrorism Act is used to deny, to abuse people's rights, as we've seen from this clip. We, as the commissioners, are very concerned, and we come from different backgrounds. We are concerned that the situation of human dignity, justice is not in place. And we would like to lift these issues to the global level and give them voice, because the victims of this repressive regime is something that affects the lives of all people. We've seen from the testimonies how people are accused to be communists, and using those labels, they are then mistreated, abused, and even killed. It is appalling to see that in today's global community, as the report has rightly shown, we need to work harder to stop the killings and violations of human rights in the Philippines. The first report has been submitted to the Human Rights Commission by these commissioners. We are aware that the special rapporteurs for Philippines are doing their work, but obviously we need to step up, and the commissioners have compiled this report, submitted it, and we would want to continue to advocate for the total restoration of human dignity and human rights. As a group of actors in this commission, we are also related to other organizations on the ground. For instance, the churches, the civil society. And so we gather information from our networks, and together we able to bring it to the fore. We want to thank the chair for convening this, because this is an urgent matter. It's a matter that has been going on for very long in terms of violation. And I think it is a shame to the global community that even when we have evidence-based information, it is still not enough to push for transformation. I will not take very long, but to say that the faith communities that we represent as members of World Council of Churches, with our membership on the field, we are very concerned, because we believe that every human being is formed in the image of God. And that image is universal. The dignity of humanity is universal. And therefore, it doesn't really matter that we use several categories to oppress and to suppress the rights of people. It is this that has made this commission to take the initiative in order to work together with the various organs of the UN, and particularly the UN Commission on Human Rights, to really lift the voices of those. We are in solidarity. We are in a companionship to have dignity, to have peace, to have human rights of all people affirmed as per the United Nations Human Rights Charter. So, Chair, I think it is important to state from the beginning that this commission is concerned that it brings the evidence-based information from the ground to the various UN bodies, particularly the human rights, and that can help them in actually understanding the reality on the ground. Further, that even if we need policy changes and maybe constitutional changes, it is not enough. It has to do with a culture that needs to be changed. It has to do with the leadership that needs to understand that they are part of the global community, and the global community has sets of values that we go by and need to uphold and work and lead with those values. So thank you so much. I hope that this report and these cases can further affirm why this commission exists and why we need to really engage everybody to help stop the brutal killings and the violations of the Filipino people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Agnes. I'd now like to introduce Jean Myra, who's a human rights lawyer from the International Association of Democratic Lawyers in the United States. Jean?
The International Association of Democratic Lawyers, of which I am president, has been in existence since 1946 and has been upholding the rights of human rights defenders throughout the world since that time. We want to salute all the brave persons who have worked on this report, those who have worked on it at great peril, and we want to say how proud we are to be part of the process of Investigateph. I want to follow up from what Dr. Agnes said to talk about the issue of domestic remedies, which is one of the focal points of this report. The issue of domestic remedies is of profound importance. In the report, we hold that domestic remedies have been crippled to the point of being non-existent, or that they provide no remedy at all for what is documented as institutional militarization of the police and their efforts under the guise of the drug war, the elimination of local communist armed conflict or terrorism to quell dissenting or critical voices. They have used the term red tagging to put in danger many human rights defenders, putting the very people who are being complained about, unfortunately, in charge of domestic remedies, which this report shows, or allowing them to have the ability to obstruct the investigation, is the very definition of having the fox guard the hen house. There is no accountability. Obstacles to accessing the ombudsman or the courts destroy any semblance of accountability. And accountability for police or government wrongs are the hallmarks of international standards on the use of force by law enforcement, and have been codified in the 1990 basic principles of the use of force by law enforcement. The right to an effective remedy for government wrongs or wrongs implemented by the government through its actions is the cornerstone of all human rights instruments, which the Philippine government has ratified. Without adequate domestic remedies for people who are protesting poverty, lack of health care, the grabbing of indigenous lands, etc., the hope of that the government will protect human rights is diminished to non-existent. In fact, what we see is that the government has decided that human rights should be silenced through repression. Historically, this has never worked. And in fact, it's important for the world community to see that this is the approach that the Duterte government has taken. It is a hope that people who are struggling for their basic necessities will just be silent. They will not. They will continually seek to obtain a better life, and they should not be met with impunity. Impunity, unfortunately, begets more impunity, and people who are subject that and the belief that the police and the government are above the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney Jean. I'll just introduce the next speaker in 1 second, but I'd encourage those of you who work on Twitter that you should tweet about this event using the hashtag InvestigatePH. So I'd now like to introduce to you Suzanne Adderley. She's also a lawyer from the United States. She's the president of the National Lawyers Guild. So please go ahead, Suzanne.
Thank you. I first would like to join others in honoring the courage of all of the human rights defenders, survivors, witnesses, civil society organizations, journalists and lawyers, and all advocates on the ground that contributed to this important report. The findings are a grave concern to all of those who have read it and all of those who believe in human rights. And we urge the international legal and civil society community to act on all of its recommendations. In particular, the March 7th killing of 7 people, including trade unionists, indigenous leaders, and urban poor organizers in their homes, is an alarming but sadly reflective of is an alarming update but sadly reflective of too much bloodshed and repression that we've seen in recent years. And we all must act to end these human rights violations and uphold the integrity of the laws that were created to protect people. I would particularly like to raise this morning also our concerns, my concerns and the concerns of my colleagues in the United States over the Anti-Terrorism Act, which was mentioned in the report, which was undemocratically fast-tracked in the Philippines in July of 2020. The Anti-Terrorism Act is a harmful mechanism that exploits an ever-expansive terrorism framework that historically, and we've seen in other areas of the globe, has been used to target, discriminate against, and silence political dissenters and human rights activists with threats against them and violations of internationally recognized human rights. The act erodes the rule of law by allowing the executive branch unbridled authority to designate any individual or organization as terrorists, and allows the government a free hand in criminalizing political opponents across every sector of society. Extending the power of the state to label and criminalize certain groups of people as terrorists leads to inevitable violations of human rights and due process, and we fear it will lead to even further bloodshed in the Philippines. So we urge the Philippine Supreme Court, in exercising its appropriate power and independent judgment, to adhere to international and domestic law and declare the Anti-Terrorism Act unconstitutional, and take immediate steps to nullify the law and provide relief for those already unjustly criminalized and harmed under the act. And we urge the international community to continue lifting up their voices to oppose the law. And this is, I think, something very important for us to act on, in addition to continuing our duties as commissioners, to listen to the findings of the report and to put our voices out there to really pressure the international community to put pressure on the Philippines to end these human rights violations. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Suzanne. I'd like to introduce Archbishop Joris Verkamen, who's based in the Netherlands from the Old Catholic Church. Go ahead, please, Archbishop.
So, honoring the people who collaborate on this important report, I'm speaking as a bishop of a Dutch Catholic Church, over 70 years already in full communion with one of the Filipino churches, the Iglesia Filipina Independiente. It's a church that, together with other churches, with the Ecumenical Bishops' Forum in the Philippines and with the National Council of Churches of the Philippines, is very involved in the struggle of the Philippine people for social justice and a peaceful society. So that's the reason why the head of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente is the observer on the peace talks between the Filipino government and the National Democratic Front as well. And it is on his behalf that I am the third party depository documents of those peace talks. And those peace talks are my concern, actually, and that those peace talks are stopped some years ago again. They were actually successful, but on the initiative, or on the lack of the initiative, because of the lack of initiative of the Filipino government, they didn't continue. So, also a member of the Central Committee of the World Council of Churches and a strong advocate of the social and political witness of that global fellowship of churches, I am fully behind this report and behind the people and advocating for all those victims and victims of the human rights violations and the repression in the Philippines. And I see the work of Investigateph as a mean to mirror the faces of many Filipinas and Filipinos and to present their suffering and grief to their own government, to the International Peace Building Institutes, and to the international public opinion. Not only in order to give them a voice, but also to invite the other side to respond to their lives and privation. It's my hope that again some space will be given to opportunities to talk to one another, and more substantial, that the peace talks would be resumed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. Now, our final commissioner speaking this evening is Reverend Dr. Chris Ferguson from the World Communion of Reformed Churches based in Germany. So over to you, Chris.
Yes, thank you, and thank you to everybody who joins us in listening to the voices of those courageous people who have suffered and have put their lives to protect the lives of others, and have had the courage now to speak up and to rise up so that life can flourish and justice can prevail. And I think that we need to immediately go to some of the concrete recommendations of this dramatic situation. And one of them, of course, is to locate what we're doing in terms of a world rising up, where we're gathering energy to see people who are all saying no to authoritarian governments and no to the erosion of the mechanisms of international law and no to the refusal to respect multilateral mechanisms. So we're calling very much in a specific term for those, the UN system and the international community to, as a way into understanding what they need to be about in terms of being consequent to the situation in the Philippines, is to take as an example the need to immediately stop what is going on and to defend and protect the witnesses and those who have given testimony and come forward. To break that cycle with the very people who raise their voice become further victims of this terrible situation. We look at all the headings that are in the content of the report, and I commend them to you. And it's interesting here, we focus on the violation of civil and political rights. But by focusing on those rights, it is interconnected with the larger issues. Archbishop Joris has spoken about peace, very much that horizon, the issues of conflict in Mindanao, the rights of indigenous people, land, issues even to dramatically to the situation of the rights of human rights defenders and even the rights of children. As one of the sub-commissioners hearing testimony, and was just incredibly hard to hear and take in that human rights defenders, more than one, working with the poor and the powerless, themselves pregnant women, separated from their children in detention on trumped up charges, where in fact the infants later died. In all things, take these cases to shine the light on the deeper sense of extrajudicial killings, torture, unjust detention, political repression through threats and red tagging, forced evacuation, violations of freedom of press and assembly, other violations of humanitarian law. Those very structures are at play. And I think that I represent a worldwide Christian community of over 100 million people, related also with the World Council of Churches. And within that community, we understand to be present and victims in suffering, because it's people of our own community, the United Church of Christ in the Philippines, connected with workers, fisher peoples, journalists, human rights defenders, indigenous people, who are affirming their life and searching for the instruments of the international community to stand up and defend and protect them, and to create a moment again where impunity is refused and justice is upheld. So I commend to all those listening to this to look specifically at the recommendations, to understand the need for further investigations, to move from investigations to firm action, short term, stop the killings, protect those who try to protect others, and move towards creating a system of respect for law and justice in the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. Chris Ferguson. We're going to now have an open forum with the media. So there'll be questions to the commissioners. And I have the first question before me now. It's from Marianne Dada from France 24. What can commissioners tell us about the meeting with Michelle Bachelet's office? What did they say about the evidence collected? Did they have official contact with the International Criminal Court? So I think it's either Chris or Archbishop Joris to answer on this one, or Dr. Agnes.
If Dr. Agnes would like to begin, I'd be pleased to compliment.
Mhm.
Chris, I think you can go ahead, or a bishop or Archbishop. Feel free.
I mean, we had a meeting that was very much based on information sharing, bringing the findings forward, and I think we found very much affirmation of the needs and importance to move forward with this kind of evidence-based investigation. We learned of the efforts that will be made for in-country programs and advisory capacities with the government, and spoke about the different forums and need to respond to the urgent situation through the mechanisms of effective investigation and looking at the both legislative and structural components that are necessary. I mean, in a word, I think we can say that the report was heard and received with a common understanding of the need to move forward urgently to take the evidence presented seriously.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything to that, Archbishop Joris?
Perhaps one word. Thank you, Chris, for your summary. I think the work of the Investigateph was very appreciated by the Commission as well. So, I think those people are in need also for information, and so they are very pleased to get those informations from the ground. I see that's our role as well, to be the communicator of the information that is available on the ground. And I felt it very satisfying that it was that appreciated by those people who have actually a very important but difficult task.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Krishia Subing of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. A major part of the report seeks to debunk the Department of Justice's claim that domestic remedies are working because state agents are perpetrators, the failing mechanisms for accountability and very slow judicial processes. With this, can the UN Human Rights Council resolution for technical assistance and capacity building still be expected to do good because it assumes there's some level of cooperation and domestic checks and balances? How can the resolution thus be maximised? Or if not, what's the best alternative? Would one of our legal commissioners like to take that one up?
I can do so.
Go ahead.
I'll start. I think one of the key findings of this report is that the domestic remedies currently are not adequate. And from everything that we have seen, especially with the rise in red tagging, the rise in attacks, the use of the anti-terror law, the approach of the government is not to preserve human rights, but actually to try to repress anybody asking for human rights and to make it almost impossible for them to get any effective remedy. In that regard, the demand from the report is that the Human Rights Council itself do a inquiry commission that would be based on international actors and the international community doing its own investigation, and in fact supplementing what we are doing through that process. We don't believe that there's good faith on the part of the government at this point to do anything but repress human rights defenders and human rights violators, and to actually believe that all members of the civil society who are trying to fight against poverty and other human rights violations are either terrorists or members of the NPA, and that is incorrect and is also very dangerous. And there's no indication that the government has changed its approach. It seems like it's doubling down and trying harder to use repression as its only mechanism of addressing human rights.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean. Does anybody else want to comment quickly on that question? Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay. In the audience, I'd like just to acknowledge that we have journalists from the BBC, Howard Johnson, and Riaz from Ankara News. If they would like to ask a question, you could switch on your mic and speak out. If not, we have other questions I can read from the text.
Yeah, I'm here. I can ask a question.
Go ahead, thanks, Howard.
Yeah, I just wondered what your top line findings are. What are the key findings from your report? Do you have new case studies or examples you can share with us? What are your sort of 3 key findings, perhaps, that you would like to share with us tonight?
Peter, should I just start?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
I mean, the report that the High Commissioner did last June talked about the reality of human rights violations and political repression. Our key finding is that is ongoing, it is intensified, it is worse. Secondly, the understanding that since that time we have evidence of new legislation and mechanisms like the Anti-Terrorist Act and this establishment of a national task force that actually has created mechanisms to bolster and aid and abet the very violation of human rights, that show that the third point is that there continues to be any lack of domestic remedies, so that the response to the initial evidence brought forward by the UN system, really saying yes, but there's ways of dealing with, is, first of all, those very tools themselves are not in keeping, like, for instance, the Anti-Terror Act, with the very standards and norms of international humanitarian law that need to be respected. And then on the other hand, we saw very clearly how those aren't operative. I think the clip we started with illustrates that there is an avalanche of new cases and spiraling. So not only has the situation raised up in the June report not been dealt with, our findings are very clear. I think the other issue is that it points to, although the report isn't explicit about it, it points to that the very clear focus on political and civil rights violations simply opens the door to see the variety of social, economic, and cultural rights that are also at stake.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I've got another question here. The report also acknowledges the dangers of red tagging, something which I think was not mentioned so much in the 2020 OHCHR report. Is the red tagging of lawyers, dissidents, and critics. Considering that the global community has only ever assessed President Duterte's human rights violations through the drug war, can the red tagging phenomena affect the examination of possible crimes against humanity here? And if so, how? That's again from Krichia, from the Inquirer. So, Suzanne, would you like to have a go at that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, speaking as sort of a human rights advocate from within the United States, I perhaps mainstream media in the U.S. hasn't reported as much about the red tagging practices in the Philippines as they have around sort of the drug wars, which is sort of like a narrative that you see in the media. But I think that when I've looked at the situation, I have seen this practice of red tagging as being something quite serious, and not necessarily as separated from the drug war and the targeting and attacking of the poor, and not necessarily related, not necessarily separate from what we're kind of seeing emerging with this new Anti-Terrorism Act. And sort of targeting poor people as drug pushers, and targeting political opponents is with red tagging, and also now targeting political opponents as terrorists, are all in many ways sort of the same practice as sort of the government going after its political opponents, sort of using different frameworks. And I think that is what we need to really focus on, because all of those are kind of not just a violation of the rights of the people who are targeted, or violation of domestic and international laws, but it's also even kind of a violation of just sort of the humanity of these folks. And I've looked as a lawyer, with great concern over specifically the attacks on lawyers who've been red tagged, but also lawyers who have been killed because of their defense of those who've been accused of drug crimes, or those who've been accused of terrorism. And I think, at least 61 lawyers have been killed, or jurists have been killed under the Duterte administration. And what these lawyers all had in common was that they were coming to the defense of people who were being targeted by the state. And we see that as being kind of an escalation of war on people on all levels of society, by going after those that are specifically designated to defend those whose rights are being violated. So how can these domestic remedies have any credibility or integrity when those that are the ones who are going to be navigating those legal mechanisms within the Philippines in defense of people are being assassinated or threatened with their lives, or criminalized on false charges, etc. So I think that this speaks to red tagging practices, as well as just to other ways that in which the state have targeted political opponents and poor people.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I've got the next question also from Marianne Dada, but I'd like to just say that there's some questions coming through about where can I get a copy of the report itself. The report is 198 pages long, so it's it was a bit difficult to juggle how to do it with this launch here, but all media people who are registered for the launch will receive a package straight after, which will give them access to the report. The next question is, how do they expect pandemic-related restrictions will affect the fieldwork investigation in the coming months, based on the experience of the first round? That's again from Marianne Dada. So that's to us. How do we expect? Yep. So perhaps I can answer this just in a coordinating sense. We've had to cope with this in the first, this initial report as well. So none of us could travel from the international community into the Philippines to directly meet people and talk to them. This is actually the reality for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights project as well. So we relied on domestic-based witness coordination teams and lawyers and paralegals who collated a lot of the documents, who also interviewed people, either on Zoom or by phone. And this is really going to be the way we have to do the next report as well, considering the pandemic situation. There's a question from Mike Navallo. Sorry,
Peter,
go ahead.
Just to make a quick point to continue to draw people's attention to the content of the report, Peter's, you've correctly talked about the technical business about how the COVID-19 pandemic restricts or shapes how we conduct investigations. The report itself also points to how the COVID restrictions have been used to cover state repression. And I just wanted to make that connection, which wasn't in the question, but is definitely part of the findings of the report. So that there are two issues about the COVID issues. One is the practical obstacles to carrying out the investigation, and the other is the way in which public health measures have been used to cover up repressive actions.
Thank you, Chris. Yes?
I think, Peter, it is very serious that the question raised on the impact of pandemic, because in many ways, because of lack of interaction, the culture of silencing people, of undermining, if not destroying the democratic gains and the peace gains that had been made by the Filipino people, becomes very easy for the state mechanisms, because they use the pandemic regulations and rules to actually isolate people and to continue the war on the people. I think it is so critical that while we look at the difficulty of carrying out assessments and getting voices, to actually locate the fact that the pandemic has exacerbated the isolation, the repression of people, and therefore unable to even share their pain and sorrow across the networks. This is a very important issue. It touches on the health, but also on the relations of people, and the state mechanisms are therefore entrenching this violation culture, the culture of silencing, and creating a culture of fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Agnes. I'll just go now to the next question, which is from Mike Novello of ABS-CBN News. He says, I'd like to ask about the process by which you went about preparing the report. I saw citations from news reports in the Philippines. Were there also interviews with actual victims or witnesses based in the Philippines? May I know what difficulties they shared in accessing accountability mechanisms to support the report's findings that domestic remedies in the Philippines are failing? Thank you. So would somebody like to take up that one? It's very similar to what we just said, but it's a little bit more pointed. Perhaps go ahead, Suzanne. No?
Maybe Peter, you can pick it, because
yeah, I think
you already mentioned some things.
Okay, so Mike, the report has mostly in the annexes case summaries and case notes of 49 cases, plus another 15, which were more recent, which struck the commissioners as very compelling, and we didn't really want to ignore that these things had happened just as we were coming to the end of making the report. So there is actually a lot of material in the report which is directly coming from witnesses, and all of the witnesses, signed formal documents authorising Investigateph to use their statements. So we hope we protected everybody, that is the witnesses and also the people taking the statements and ourselves in this process, because you know how fraught it is that people trying to do their best in the judicial system in the Philippines can be themselves then charged with serious crimes, kidnapping, all this sort of thing. So as for the difficulties they shared in accessing accountability mechanisms, unfortunately, it really is heart-wrenching to read the statements from these witnesses about how they went to the ombudsman, or they went to the police, or in some cases they were going to the Supreme Court, and there's pretty well not one case really of any success for them. Although we know in the media there are some moments when after 18 months or more, somehow the charges get dropped. But you'll see in the documents that are available in the report that it's a heart-wrenching reality that people face. And that is why I think when we've come, by online means into a community and said what we're trying to do, is really a cry comes directly to us in Investigate PH that we need your help. We really hope you can help us. We hope somehow or other justice can come, because it's not coming in the Philippines itself. I think so I've got one more question. Is this report being shared to governments such as the United States, who only send assistance to countries who are not human rights violators? Should the Biden administration stop sending US aid or military aid to the Philippines until these alleged human rights abuses in the Philippines are resolved? Perhaps we can make this the last question. And would one of the commissioners, perhaps from the United States, want to pick this one up?
I can start with that question.
Go, Suzanne.
So I think that absolutely, if the those who've worked on getting this report released and any future reports and those of us kind of working collectively in this commission agree on sharing this report with specific members of the U.S. Government. I think that that could be something that's quite important. Human rights violations in the Philippines are on the radar of several lawmakers in the United States, and our concern of lawmakers in the United States. And that, I think, is due to the hard work of civil society groups within the U.S. who have bringing these issues to the attention of lawmakers. On the question of the Biden administration and continued military aid to the Philippines, I think that is an important and sort of valid strategy. And in particular, in the United States, we do have laws on the books, and particularly Leahy law, which specifically prohibits the United States Department of State and Department of Defense from providing military assistance and to foreign security forces or units that violate human rights with impunity. And I think that if we are seriously acting upon US laws like the Leahy law, that we can use the cutting off of military aid as pressure on the Philippines government to stop these violations and stop the current bloodshed. And so I would welcome, from what I know about US law, I would welcome that that pursuit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
There's also a law that's already been introduced into the U.S. House calling for that remedy of cutting off. That was based primarily on the drug war, but I think clearly our work in the U.S. with civil society organizations is going to enhance that with this report.
Thank you. Okay. I think we'll stop the questions now because we've come to an hour already. I really think it's great. We've had so much attention on this launch and the ideas and recommendations and content of the report. Any journalists who want to do other interviews with any of the commissioners, please just contact us through Investigate PH and we can arrange that. We're going to have one more video just to help bookend this experience, and then we'll ask everyone to hang on. We'll have a photo shoot of the gallery for this rather big audience we have gathered here for the launch. So let's move now to the video, please.
To uplift human dignity.
Philippines will continue to protect the human rights.
Napakalaki kawalan ng anak ko sa akin. Tapos sasabihin lang ng kapulisan, collateral damage. Masakit po talaga.
Hinahangad talaga namin na magkaroon ng investigasyon at panagutin.
Bigay ko dyan sa mga dumas na yan. Umalis kayo dyan. Bubombahan ko yan.
Habang po kami ay nasa klase, pinagbabaril po yung school namin. Bata pa po ako. Ba't magaranas ako ng ganito?
Hindi namin alam kung sino kakasuhan namin.
I will not hesitate my soldiers to shoot you. I will not hesitate to order the police to arrest and detain you. Ako, magpakamatay ako sa prinsipyo ko. Kung ikamatay ko, okay yan sa akin. Ipakulong ako habang may okay sa akin yan. Pero ginawa ko ang ko na tama.
Okay, so there we are. The video clip is circulating on Facebook, and I encourage everybody who wants to share it through their social media platforms. Let's have the gallery screen. Possible? Yeah. And if the tech could just let us know when they've taken an image. And while they're doing that, I just urge you to read the report. It's about 40 pages of the text, but about 150 pages of cases. So it's a combination of a lot of work by teams in the Philippines, plus the online hearings held by commissioners with victims and relatives in 10 emblematic cases. I'd like to thank especially all those teams that did that work. So starting with the commissioners, sub-commissioners, the witness coordination team, the legal team of collators, and the communications team and the writers team, which I was on the edge of myself. Everyone's done a very high level of effort to get it here, and we have more to do. So thank you very, very much, everybody, and we can do this together. Thank you.
Excuse me, can we open our camera so that I can take a screenshot of this gathering?
So some of those people still got their cameras shut. Please open them if you can. So we have 134 participants right now. It's good.
Another one. Fourth screen. Another two more. That's. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to our tech team tonight as well. Thank you. Okay, from me, it's good night. Good day to you. We'll meet again for sure on this journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Senator Mo Wilson.